Could the teachings of Islam, beautiful, peaceful Islam, be the key to solving the global sexual abuse crisis? Well, I'm going to tell you why I and some pretty hard data find that argument absolutely ridiculous. There was an article published recently in The Independent out of the UK entitled, "How the Teachings of Islam Could Help Us Prevent More Sexual Abuse Scandals." It was written by a guy named Qasim Rashid, and let me give you a couple of his preposterous arguments within. First, he starts quoting the Quran. Quran 4:2 first establishes men and women as equal beings. Chapter 420 of the Quran then forbids men from forcing a woman to act against her will, thereby ensuring women maintain autonomy and self-determination. He then goes on to tell his story about the Prophet Muhammad, who was sitting with his friend Al-Fadl. And while Muhammad was sitting with Al-Fadl, what they called a strikingly beautiful woman came to talk to Muhammad about religion. And Al-Fadl is staring this woman up and down. He's like looking right through her. But Muhammad doesn't scold the woman for her dress. No, he grabs Al-Fadl's chin and pulls his head away and admonishes him. Because Muhammad, the prophet, the guy who had, I think, a 9-year-old wife, cared so much about women. This guy goes on, this Qasim Rashid, in this article, to condemn Christianity and all other religions as the root of all evil, and tells us if we're just good dhimmi, if we just surrender to Sharia and live a Muslim lifestyle, the world's ills will be cured, starting with the sexual abuse of women. But the data tells a very, very different story. So let's jump right in. Let's look at a U.S. News report on the 10 worst countries for gender inequality. All but 2 on the list are Muslim nations. Number 10 is Jordan. Number 9 is Egypt. Number 8 is Indonesia. Number 7 is Turkey. Number 6 is Iran. Number 5 is Malaysia. Number 4 is Algeria. Number 3 is India. Number 2 is South Korea. The only 2 on the list that aren't predominantly Muslim. But I bet if you dig into the India numbers, you'll find their large Muslim population are the worst perpetrators of this. And number 1, predictably, doesn't surprise anybody, is Saudi Arabia, possibly the worst nation in the world for women's rights. 80% of the countries on this list are Muslim nations. But it shouldn't surprise you, because another study from the U.S. Institute for Peace that looked at Afghanistan told us, this is pretty horrible stuff, 87% of women in Afghanistan have experienced at least one form of domestic abuse. 62% of women in Afghanistan have experienced multiple forms of violence. The Taliban is there. Strict Muslims, right? They had strict adherence to Islam and the Quran. Not a perverted version, by the way. They are strict adherents to Islam, as is ISIS. So it wouldn't surprise you that the Daily Mail did a story on a study that told us, and here's the title, I'll read it to you word for word. Rapists and wife-beaters flocked to join ISIS because the group's systemized sexual violence appealed to them, study shows. The worst of the worst, the rapists and the wife-beaters love that ISIS rapes young girls, sells them into sex slavery, uses them as objects, owns them as chattel. That's why the worst of the worst sexual abusers on the planet joined ISIS, why many of them did. Because the Islamic State's treatment of women, its barbaric, horrible treatment of women, appealed to them. Well, this kind of throws a wrench in old Qasim Rashid's gears with his arguments, now doesn't it? Let's go to the World Health Organization and let's talk about a topic that gives me chills to even discuss. Female genital mutilation. Now, these numbers are absolutely mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing. 200 million girls and women around the world have been subject to female genital mutilation. 200 million. So I went on and did a little bit more studying on this issue. And what I found next really blew me away. Here in the United States, 507,000 girls and women are either at risk of being cut or have already been cut. In the United States, 500,000 victims of female genital mutilation. In the U.S., in the constitutional republic, the United States of America, this barbaric practice is taking place, due mainly to Muslim migration. There's a real problem with abuse in the Muslim community. We looked at another article written, believe it or not, in the left-wing Harvard Gazette back in 2010 that begrudgingly had to admit, quote, From 70 to 90% of women in Pakistan are subjected to some kind of domestic violence. Now, Pakistan's important to note because the pedophile scandals we saw in the UK, in Rochdale and Rotherham, were primarily Pakistani perpetrators, right? These numbers will also blow you away. Now, in the UK, there's an organization called CEOP, the Child Exploitation and Online Privacy Protection Center. I forget what the P stands for. I worked with them back when I did work with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. CEOP does tremendous work. They are incredibly professional, incredibly professional cops and analysts and law enforcement folks from across the spectrum of investigative disciplines. They do a tremendous job. In fact, much of Europe looks to CEOP for their own investigative protocols and their own enforcement protocols on child sexual abuse. The CEOP classifies offenders in two types. Type 1 offenders are critical. Those are the offenders who specifically target victims because of their vulnerability. The numbers are going to blow you away. 75% of recorded type 1 group abusers who target victims based on vulnerability were Asian, which is the UK politically correct buzzword for Muslim. Now, the Office for National Statistics estimates that only 7.5% of the UK population is Asian, buzzword for Muslim. So the Muslims coming into the UK are raping children at a rate 10 times their representation in the population, according to the British government. Compared to whites, white offenders were 17% of all offenders, and they're 86% of the UK population. This is epidemic level, but the left continues to sell us this religion of peace narrative, and you're at no more risk of a migrant from a predominantly Muslim nation than you are from one from Ireland or Finland or Australia. It is absolute nonsense. It's putting women at risk, it's putting children at risk, and we have to put an end to it. We have to put an end to the political correctness, and we need to protect the most vulnerable. I'm John Cardillo, and if you find this content as compelling and critically important as I do, please subscribe to our premium service at www.therebel.media/shows. I'll be back with you tomorrow. Have a great one.